Welcome to CRE Radio and TV. I'm your host, Howard Klein, and today we're going to be talking about dual agency and the disclosures necessary by real estate brokers. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Bob Cantor, who posted an article from the San Diego source on LinkedIn. Thank you, Bob. Now, Jerry Brown recently signed into law a requirement that commercial real estate brokers in California are required to disclose in writing a dual agency. The interesting thing about this law is, one, that this was not a requirement of commercial brokers previously, drawing a distinction between residential brokers and commercial brokers, and two, this law does not apply to leases. It only applies to purchase and sale transactions. Now, you have to ask yourself a question. Even if the law allows a dual agency and you make the appropriate disclosures, should you represent both the buyer and the seller in a transaction, or for that matter, even in a lease? And my answer is an unequivocal no. You're begging for a lawsuit. Let me tell you a little story. About 3 years ago, I represented a tenant in a litigation matter with his landlord. It was an office transaction. The tenant was represented by a broker who also was a broker for the landlord, who, by the way, also happened to have been a principal for the landlord. The broker provided a lease that said at the top, gross office lease. But of course, in most instances, there's no such thing as a pure gross or net lease. In this particular case, the gross lease was a gross lease only for the first year. After the first year, there was an escalation that included additional charges for any increase in taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance charges. So, of course, after the first year, a new bill was sent to the tenant with some pretty hefty increases that the tenant wasn't expecting. They tried to resolve their differences amicably, and finally the tenant moved out of the premises prior to the end of the lease. The landlord then sued the tenant. I represented the tenant. We won the case, but I will say this. When you represent both sides of a transaction and you're a dual agent, you take on fiduciary responsibilities which are much more stringent than in other situations. In that case, if you fail to explain to the tenant or one of the parties what the terms of the lease are, you're just begging for that lawsuit, and I don't think that that is a good idea under any circumstances. Whether you're being represented in court by me or anyone else, the last thing you want is a lawsuit. If you want to know more about any of our sponsors, all you have to do is click on one of the logos to my right. And remember, if you'd like to have your logo behind me on any of our videos, send an email to sponsor@CRE Radio or click on the link to my right.